The threat to Americans' financial health isn't credit card debt or student loans or even housing costs, it's gambling. And I'm not talking about the kind of gambling that happens in the smoky back rooms of a casino or requires a trip to Atlantic City, but the sanitized, gamified, always accessible betting that has been woven into the fabric of American life so seamlessly that we barely recognize it anymore. I'm Hannah Horvath. I'm a financial expert that talks about money psychology in the context of cultural and social issues. And today I want to talk about the United States of debt. 55% of adults participated in some form of gambling in 2024, up from 49% the year prior. And Americans are expected to wager about 150 billion on sports this year alone. I don't think many people understand the scale and speed in which gambling has kind of entered our culture. In 2018, the Supreme Court legalized sports gambling. And from there, it has basically exploded all over the country. And I'm not just talking about sports betting. I'm talking about the rise of gambling-like activities like investing in crypto, day trading. All of these trigger the same mechanisms in our head. They are the same actions involved as other types of gambling. And it is destroying the kind of social fabric of a lot of our culture. It is leading to super high rates of debt. It is leading to sort of a crisis, especially among young men. So I want to talk about, kind of how the line between gambling and other types of activities like investing has completely blurred, how this reshapes our relationship with money and risk, and what this means for your brain, your wallet, all of it. So gambling has been around for a while. It has deep roots in American culture. You think about riverboat gambling, frontier casinos, Atlantic City, Las Vegas, that kind of rose in the mid 20th century. But gambling, up until very recently, has always been contained, regulated, and did carry some social stigma, which could help enforce or prevent people from getting into gambling. Then, like I said, everything changed in 2018 when the Supreme Court struck down the law that was banning sports betting. The timing really could not have been more perfect for the gambling industry. In 2018 and now, everyone is carrying around a tiny computer with their credit card information stored, high-speed internet, and apps that are designed to be addictive. I'm talking about our phones, of course. So the infrastructure for a gambling revolution was already very much in place. And since 2018, over 35 states have legalized sports betting. So the market has exploded from essentially zero to a 10 billion annual industry, projected to hit 167 billion by 2030. 73 million Americans placed sports bets in 2023. That's up 60% from 2020. And this is especially prevalent among men, especially young men. Among men under 50, nearly 1 in 3 have placed some sort of sports bet in the last year. But the real transformation and kind of what led to what it is now isn't just legal, it is cultural. So what was once associated with addiction and financial ruin is kind of been repackaged and remarketed as a smart, entertaining, socially acceptable activity. Chances are you have seen some sort of sports betting ad in the past year. Celebrity and athlete endorsements. Many major sports leagues are now promoting betting, and it just lends credibility and aspirational appeal to gambling. It makes it seem something normal that kind of everybody is doing. In the past, sports leagues would not get involved with any type of sports gambling. They thought it would damage their integrity if they embraced it. It could lead to kind of ethics issues. Now it is a huge part of kind of the culture and the marketing around a lot of these sports. I mean, we see sports betting advertisements at, the stadiums where these games are being played. I've heard sports broadcasts that are regularly discussing betting lines and odds as part of their standard content. And social media platforms are being flooded with content that shows, betting wins and promoting gambling as a path to financial success. And the way that social media algorithms work is they often amplify these wins, so you see the person that made that like very long shot parlay or that long shot bet, but you don't see the thousands of other people that lost money with, sports betting. I remember seeing my first sports betting ad during the 2023 Super Bowl, and now you cannot escape them. They are everywhere. Podcasts, radio, social media, everywhere. And sports betting is just one small piece of the larger story about the culture of gambling in this country. The line between investing and gambling specifically has been completely blurred across multiple platforms. The traditional definition of gambling is the act of betting money on the outcome of a race, game, or unpredictable event. By that definition, much of investing is actually a form of gambling. But before, it was a lot informed by strategic analysis, fundamentals, technical analysis. But now so much of what we're doing when we say we're investing is very high risk, potentially high reward, and mostly based on vibes or what people are saying online. Like take something like Reddit's Wall Street Bets. It describes itself as 4chan found a Bloomberg terminal and it has over 19 million members. And if you didn't know, it was responsible for the infamous GameStop stock manipulation of 2021. And this is a great example of people finding community with each other and then kind of building a lot of hype around specific investments, even if kind of the data isn't there. And then you take other things like day trading, options gambling on platforms like Robinhood, crypto speculation. All of that has been reframed as investing despite functioning like a casino game. And it's important to point out that so much of this investing activity is not profitable. The studies have found that only 3% of day traders make a profit and only 1% do so predictably. Take something like cryptocurrency, which was originally created to be a digital currency or a store of value and is now very much treated like an investment. And I think there's a general perception that the numbers will keep going up, which I think drives a lot of the social buzz and socially driven investing around cryptocurrency. And then within that subset, you have meme coins, which are very much built on hype and are very prone to scams like pumping up schemes and rug pulls. And the reason why people gravitate towards them and even invest in them is because they hear these stories of people making tons and tons of money on meme coins. And so the hype around them, drives people to want to invest. You also can't talk about the culture of gambling in this country without talking about Polymarket or Kalshi, which are prediction markets that let people literally bet on everything. Through these platforms, people spent billions betting on the 2024 election, when the Pope might die, who the next Pope will be, if Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce will break up. I mean, you could really bet on everything. So when any news event happens, these platforms immediately create betting markets around it. Nothing is off limits and everything becomes an opportunity to gamble. But to understand why this is so dangerous, it's really important to understand what is happening in our brains when we place bets and gamble and why modern betting apps are so insidious. Modern betting apps don't just offer the chance to win money. They are delivering a neurological experience that is designed to create dependence. Research shows that gambling triggers a dopamine release not when we win, but when we anticipate winning. And this basically creates a flow state when you are gambling, where the world kind of falls away and you get caught in this endless cycle of anticipation at outcome repeat. And so, like I said before, the danger in this is not when you're losing, it's when you're winning. Winning can create overconfidence that overrides your rational decision making and keeps you hooked. So this gambling cycle uses the same behavioral drivers that exist behind other types of addiction, like alcohol and drugs. And, if you look at the psychological profile of modern sports bettors, it shows high levels of impulsivity and sensation-seeking behavior, which you see in other types of addiction. The instant gratification piece of gambling is really important. And when it's combined with the illusion of skill, like, for example, I know sports or I know how to play poker, therefore I can potentially predict the outcome, that creates a really, really toxic combination. Sports bettors lose an average of 7.5 cents per dollar wagered, yet 90% believe that they can make money. And some sports bettors overestimate more than 20 cents per dollar wagered. And that's just important to highlight how big the gap between thinking you're going to win and actually the result of what happens when you gamble. And that's how overconfidence can be really dangerous here. But the real winners in all this are the companies, the gambling companies that are making their money off of bettors. Sportsbooks are making a killing, especially on these long shot bets called parlays, which are appealing to casual fans because it looks like you can win a lot of money, but often deliver much bigger cuts to the house because it's often very unlikely that a parlay will kind of come true. Both sports betting apps and other types of investing apps use what researchers call dark patterns, which are design elements that specifically are intended to manipulate behavior. So they make it very easy to deposit money, but more difficult to withdraw. Maybe they send notifications at precisely calculated moments to maximize engagement or get you to engage with the app. They track users' emotional states and provide bonuses when people are most vulnerable to keep them playing. And I don't think people fully realize that a lot of these companies are spending millions and millions of dollars to buy data, analyze user data to get people to use their apps as much as possible. And that's why mobile betting is really fundamentally different from casino betting. In a casino, environmental cues remind you that you're gambling. You are in a casino. Mobile betting, on the other hand, can happen anywhere. It is invisible. It is more private. You can lose $500 on your lunch break walking to get lunch without anybody else knowing. So the infrastructure has made it easier than ever to gamble. But why are people turning to gambling? And the answer, I think, reveals something really troubling about the state of the American economy and American masculinity. One quarter of men under the age of 30 bet sports online, and 10% of young men now meet the criteria for problem gambling. Among men ages 18 to 29, 42% invested or used crypto versus only 17% of women. A recent Wall Street Journal analysis noted that speculative investing has become a form of enrichment for young men who believe that they face economic barriers. And this feeds into the idea that a lot of young consumers feel like the American dream is dead, that the traditional paths to financial success, like a stable career, buying a home, having a secure retirement, are increasingly out of reach or impossible. And gambling offers the possibility of bypassing that system altogether. The appeal of hitting it big through betting becomes understandable when the alternative is decades of saving for goals that keep moving further and further away. There's also a masculinity component here. Gambling has become associated with a very particular form of masculine identity, with the risk-taking entrepreneur, the guy who's taking a bet on himself. And platforms like Barstool Sports have really monetized this, making gambling and marketing gambling as part of an aspirational masculine lifestyle. And, if you're a young man and you feel economically powerless, betting offers a way to make it feel like you're taking control, like you're actively trying to change your situation, even if you are potentially making it worse. And of course, social media has supercharged both the normalization and the appeal of gambling in ways that are only becoming more and more clear as time goes on. Young people are constantly exposed on social media to content that shows exaggerated wins. Sometimes it could be a influencer lying about how much money they have. Sometimes it could be someone promoting a company but underselling the risks. Sometimes it's outright fraud, affiliate marketing schemes or rug pulls or pump and dumps. And when you are seeing thousands of these posts daily, it often becomes impossible to distinguish fact from fiction. And eventually, gambling starts to look like an interesting way to earn money rather than a predominant leading position. And these social media apps use very sophisticated social features to normalize certain types of behavior. You think about like leaderboards, social sharing tools, group betting features, functions that create community around gambling and in turn normalizes the behavior. As one psychologist who treats gambling addiction explained, these features ensure that once was a solitary activity becomes embedded in social relationships and peer groups. The human cost of America's gambling epidemic is becoming clear, and it is staggering. The National Council on Problem Gambling estimates that 2.5 million Americans have severe gambling problems, but this was calculated before the mobile betting explosion. So the real figure is likely much higher. CBS News reported that online searches for gambling addiction help surged 23% following sports betting legalization. Recent studies found that sports betting legalization has led to measurably lower credit scores, higher bankruptcy rates, increased debt, drained household savings, and lower overall investments. Gambling doesn't satisfy whatever psychological need drives it. It just creates an appetite for more gambling. So people who start with sports betting often escalate to things like lottery tickets, online casinos, and other forms of gambling. Obviously, there are very clear financial repercussions to gambling, but the damage goes far beyond just money. Sports betting legalization increased incidents of intimate partner violence by around 9%. Gambling has also been linked to higher rates of suicide, depression, and anxiety. As one Reddit user put it, people's lives genuinely get ruined. Think about your life spiraling to the point where you have basically no one to help you and nothing to your name. That's the ultimate end goal from anyone who spirals into the gambling trap. Even if you're not a gambler, this cultural shift towards gambling affects how your brain handles money and risk. Regular exposure to gambling, whether through sports betting apps, crypto, options, it recalibrates what feels like normal risk when it comes to investing. So if you become accustomed to potentially losing hundreds of dollars in a single bet, you start to think that that is normal when it comes to investing. Gambling wins also creates very powerful overconfidence that can spill into your other money decisions. Same with the instant gratification cycle. It trains your brain to prioritize immediate action over like slowing down and analyzing things. Betting apps and gambling apps specifically exploit what psychologists call loss aversion, which is our tendency to feel losses more strongly than gains. For example, they might provide bonus credits to keep people playing when they're losing money, which can turn a small loss into a larger loss. Overall, we're really witnessing a very fundamental shift in how Americans relate to money, risk, and financial planning. When gambling becomes normalized everywhere, it doesn't just create gambling addicts, it creates a population that is constantly primed for impulsive decision making. The population expects unrealistic returns when it comes to their money, and they may see traditional wealth building strategies as inadequate or unsexy or boring or slow. We're potentially moving from a culture of saving and investing to a culture of speculation and hoping to get lucky. And as I said before, the companies promoting all of this gambling profit when we bet and we lose. Their success depends on our financial failure. DraftKings, Robinhood, Polymarket, these companies are worth billions of dollars, and they make that money primarily from a very small percentage of problem gamblers. Only 3% of bettors account for 80% of sportsbook revenue. In other words, the entire industry depends on problem gamblers for most of its profits. And like I said before, these companies spend millions of dollars on data scientists whose only job is to identify when users are vulnerable and provide behavioral cues to get them to keep playing. What we're witnessing isn't just a new form of entertainment or even a public health crisis, though I think it is. It is a fundamental shift in American capitalism, from creating value to extracting it through psychological manipulation. And I think the stakes are higher than most people realize. This isn't just about an individual responsibility. It's about recognizing that we have allowed our entire economy to become a casino where the house always wins. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please like and subscribe and share it with somebody that you think would find it interesting. Until next week, I'm Hannah. Take care.